Hello, you're listening and watching to Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and I'm excited to welcome to the program Alex Goldfarb, who is head of the fund of Alexander Litvinenko. Alexander Litvinenko is most known to Americans and people in the West for having been killed and poisoned in London in 2006. Alex, why do you think that that was an important case? We had Litvinenko, we had Skripal, and they were both in Britain. Is that something that's something that Russia only dares to do in Great Britain, or should we have been watching out for these things in the United States?
Well, it's hard to say. United States is hopefully more secure than Great Britain, for whatever reasons, maybe because Putin wouldn't do this to Trump, which he did to British prime ministers. And why these cases are important? Because we're still talking about Litvinenko 15 years later. And the reason is that if you go forward maybe by 40, 50 years, there will be only few spots on the Putin's reign, I would say, Litvinenko among them. Litvinenko, Skripal, the downing of the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine, and Pussy Riot, maybe. That's what people will remember when they read about Putin in history books. That's a broad view. It's also important historically because Litvinenko was the first case where the policymakers in the West started to realize that Putin and his regime is not what they thought it was. It's not a fledgling democracy which is moving in the direction of joining the family of civilized and democratic nations, but something very different, and that motivations and MOD of this regime is basically hostile to the West. So that's another view of this. But for me, it's a very personal thing because Litvinenko was my friend. He died horrible radioactive death in front of my own eyes, and I kind of I'm stuck with this case, and it's been going on and on for more than a decade now, and I would love it to end, but it's impossible.
Where's the case at right now? Now, there's been an interesting development because now Russian propaganda is actually accusing you of killing Litvinenko, and you're suing them back.
Right. I'm suing two Russian propaganda channels, the national Russian channel 1, channel 1 Russia, and the international channel RT, Russia Today, for defamation in the federal court in New York. Because they, more than a year ago after the attack on two Russian, the Skripal incident in Salisbury in Britain, Russian TV and media and propaganda started a new narrative aimed at clearing the Russian regime from Western accusations that it was behind both poisonings, Litvinenko and Skripal. And in the course of this programming, they showed my photo and video all over the place, prime time, many times, saying that the truth is that it was this guy, Goldfarb, who poisoned Litvinenko because he was commissioned by the CIA to prevent Litvinenko from returning to Mother Russia, and probably something like this happened in the Skripal case too.
So which is interesting because
that's because of the basic propaganda war that's going on there. But I became part of it, and I'm trying to fight back.
Well, it's interesting because the main theory that I think has been supported by court decisions is that Litvinenko was actually murdered because he was about to go to Spain to become an official witness against Russian mafia and its connections to St. Petersburg mafia and potentially to Vladimir Putin. And that actually seems to have been proven and carried out in British court. Am I correct?
Yes, what's been proven is that Litvinenko was beyond any reasonable doubt by criminal standards of proof killed by two Russian agents who acted, as the court says, in all probabilities and personal orders of Putin. As for the motives of this murder, they didn't prove the motives. This is a theory.
Oh, okay.
Why Putin all of a sudden decided to get rid of Litvinenko. And the most reasonable theory is that he was working for the British law enforcement and the European law enforcement against Russian mafia in Spain, and specifically links of these gangsters with Putin's inner circle. And we believe that that was the reason why they decided to strike him.
And on some level, it's we can follow that trajectory because in the last year, the Spanish court made a decision where I think they didn't indict anybody for those crimes. So it sounds like maybe Litvinenko's involvement would have been crucial.
Well, we don't know really because it's still classified part of Litvinenko's life. Nobody has seen his reports. But whatever leaked into the press is, and statements of prosecutors in Spain, was that he was a central element. And by the way, we learned about it from WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks cables from Spain mentioned Litvinenko many times, saying that this is a crucial person in the Spanish investigation against Russian mafia, and that links to Putin are central to his work. That's all we know. What specifically we don't know, and maybe they don't know, the Spanish, because the only person who knows is probably Putin himself, because he knows what to fear. And maybe he was feeling that Litvinenko was about to find something. We don't know. But his work in Spain is most likely the reason why Putin decided to get rid of him.
I'll remind the audience that you're listening and watching Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin, and my guest today is Alex Goldfarb, head of fund of Alexander Litvinenko, and he is carrying on the battle, even though Alexander Litvinenko himself has been gone for, 13 years now. Alex, you have such personal experience with Russian propaganda, and yet here in the West we look at news, and when a government announces something, we tend to somehow give it a little bit of credence because, well, it's the government information. So if Russian government announces whatever, there are a number of people that are going to believe it because it's official information. Any suggestions that you would give to the audience about how to process those propaganda messages?
Well, all messages now should be taken with a grain of salt. However, there is a fundamental difference, and the difference is that in the West we have a pluralistic society, and every message coming from wherever it is immediately scrutinized by independent actors, such as free press, political opposition, members of parliament, and we see here how these independent actors are arguing with whatever narrative comes from the White House, for example, from Mr. Trump. In Russia, there is nothing like this. The media is completely and totally controlled by the state, and the government controls the media, and anybody who dares to pursue a different narrative is immediately kicked out of the profession, at most arrested. So there is no, internally in Russia, there is no means to somehow check or skeptically analyze or scrutinize the official information. That's number one. Number two is that Russia spends enormous amounts of money to pursue this propaganda war outside Russia. The budgets of Russian propaganda outlets are orders of magnitude, maybe hundreds of times more than the Western official budgets trying to counter this propaganda.
I believe RT's budget for next year is $1.3 billion.
I don't know, but it's certainly not a couple of $1 million for things like Voice of America, for example, or BBC Russian service and so on. So it's incomparable things. And the third thing I should say, that foreign propaganda, hostile propaganda, find here a fertile soil, because starting from the times of Bolsheviks and Comintern, when they properly realized that the grievances of the working class against the problems of the working class is a wonderful soil to promote subversive ideas and propaganda and so on. And we know how it went all through the 30s, and then during World War II, everybody was involved in propaganda, British in particular, and Russia, and this continues. For them, it's another way of waging war against the West, which they consider threatening. In the world outlook of Putin and his regime, the West constitutes a threat to their power, because it suggests to the people an alternative system of government. And this alternative system of government is threatening because it's more effective. And so they just make trouble here, using people who now, for whatever reasons, are unhappy with the way things are in their own lives, to foster this trust towards the Western system of government and system of society.
So that was really interesting. You said that democracy is threatening to authoritarian dictators because it affects their ability to have, money. And it's cost. You said it's not cost effective. It's more cost effective, but it also affects their money.
I can give you this analogy. Why fundamental Islamist regimes are so hostile towards the West? Iran, Osama bin Laden, all these people, because they feel that the system of values, starting from education for women and ending on with the separation of religion from the state, are threatening to the existence of their system of government, which is based on Sharia law or whatever it is.
But it's power. It's about power.
It's about power. To the same extent, the basis of Putin's hold on power is the trust of people, essentially, to him, and this is in competition with the information coming from the outside. So he promotes the idea that the West is out to get us, to destroy Russia, and they're our main enemy. And in order to counter this subversive activity of the West, we must resist and unite, consolidate around our own government. And in the process, they do everything to destabilize situations in the West, be it, Western Europe or here and so on. And that's what they are doing for the reasons of their own self-preservation. So it's the same old story like it was in 1920s in the time of Comintern and Lenin and Stalin and so on.
So it was a struggle for power. It remains a struggle for power. And And so when you see somebody like Alexei Navalny and his fund of fighting with corruption being announced in the official news that he was receiving money from outside the country and making him a foreign agent, and that's an official news release, do you look at that and go, he must be a foreign agent? Or do you say, well, where did it come from? Where did the news come from,
Navalny is obviously a Russian patriot who has a different vision of how Russia should develop and be. And that is, he's a nationalist. He thinks that Russia is a national state and should be as much part of the West as the national state of Spain or the national state of Poland. So that's what he is. But at the same time, he's a Democrat, and he doesn't like a bunch of, people whom he calls criminals and thieves to hijack the Russian government for their own purposes. And that's what's going on with Navalny. And it's
so it's more about understanding the backstory a little bit, rather than just going with the official pronouncement. Learn a little bit about a backstory, and then you understand things better.
And the official pronouncement that he is a foreign agent, which is totally fake. There is absolutely no evidence to this. He's not funded. He's not directed from abroad. But he has moral support of people like you and me, and more enlightened politicians in this side, because he represents the same set of values which we hold. So in that sense, he is a foreign agent, because the values of that are being imposed on Russia by the state propaganda machine is anathema to freedom and human rights. It's tradition, it's a strong state, it's denial of the rights of individual. That's what Russia is all about.
Right. Alex, Russia and Ukraine are in the news again, and two associates of Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal attorney, have been arrested with one-way ticket to Vienna. What are your thoughts on the emergence of these two con men so close to the president?
Well, I think that there is that's my personal political view, but there is a law of attraction of the like, that like-minded people tend to deal with like-minded people. Beyond this general observation, I don't know. The only thing I know is that these people, there is a photograph on the internet of Trump with these two gentlemen, and that they are very close to Rudy Giuliani, and that Ukraine is in the news because of this impeachment thing and alleged attempts of Trump to influence Ukrainian government to enlist them in his political campaign. So it all kind of comes together. But at the time, it's people who are accused of, of relatively small level violations who have been arrested, and then bingo, it looks that they are one step away from the president of the United States. So it's suspicious.
I find it amusing that whenever an expert is being asked, are you surprised by this? For some reason, world over, experts say, no, I'm not surprised by this. Well, no matter what, I think it's a quality of an expert. And I consider you an expert. So what would you not be surprised by if we found out about these men? Do you think, would you be surprised if they were working with Ukrainian leadership or Russian leadership or Russian Secret Service or who? What would surprise you about it? What would not surprise you?
Well, not at all, because we know again from history that the top leaders, when they have to carry out some sort of unsavory acts, they use all kinds of unsavory characters. Remember what happened in Watergate. Nixon was one step away of those low-level operatives, ex-CIA, who broke in the middle of the night into the headquarters of the Democratic Party to steal some election documents, which seems stupid. but in retrospect, because it cost Nixon the presidency. So I would not be surprised, because I'm not surprised that Putin used some totally inept agents to try to poison Skripal in Salisbury.
In Salisbury.
And who got caught red-handed. Why was he doing it? It's totally self-defeating. But that's what happens again and again and again with the people in power.
So if you found out that these two were just arrested, if they had all these connections to Ukraine or Russian, either money or Secret Service, none of that would surprise you, or would it surprise you? Not.
No, it will not surprise me at all.
Okay.
I mean, given those examples in history. But again, at the moment, we don't know. We only know that those guys were arrested and they're close to the Trump's inner circle.
All right. I'll remind listeners and viewers that you're listening and watching Rashkin Report. Make sure to like the page on Facebook, sign up and like the YouTube channel, and leave comments and likes. Those are very important to make sure that more people have these opportunities to see conversations with, I think, really interesting people.
Yes, and if I may,
yeah, please.
Interject, those who are interested in our
fundraising campaign, yes.
Yes, those who are interested in our lawsuit against Russian propaganda machine, please go to the site litvinenkocase.com, and you will see all the latest news of our lawsuit in New York against Russian TV. And you can chip in like $5 to $10 to help us to pay our lawyers.
Alex, I can't think of a better use for $5. My question next, though, is thank you for mentioning that information. You have long and storied biography where you have left Soviet Union back in 1975, and you lived in Israel, and you got a PhD, and you've been teaching at really impressive schools, and then you worked with George Soros for nearly a decade. And that is somebody who has a really almost mystical reputation out in the West, and as well as in the East, I guess, at this point. What is your experience of knowing George Soros personally? Who is this person?
Well, George Soros is a high intellectual, I should say, even though I haven't spoken to him for 15 years or maybe more. We kind of parted, but he's a great guy. He is smart. He made tons of money, and he decided he wants to use them to advance his worldview, and his worldview is liberal, progressive. In many cases, he takes very liberal causes. He started with, and that's when I worked with him, and trying to promote the transition of the former Soviet Union to democracy. And he spent hundreds of millions of dollars to this effect. I would say it was quite effective. It's not his fault that in the end it didn't work as he planned, because these are not democracies. I mean, the Eastern Europe are democracies, but not the Soviet Union, and not Russia. And what is remarkable to me is that he is now became, the standard demonic symbol of both radical right and radical left. Radical left believe that Soros is a quintessential capitalistic plutocrat who uses his money to subvert the interests of whomever they perceive to be oppressed by the capitalist society. And he is much attacked by fringe left and fringe right, or radical right, which unfortunately now has become the dominant trend in the conservative and the Republican politics, sees his as a quintessential Jewish, liberal who supports and pays for all those things which are anathema to the conservative right, for religious tolerance, for sexual equality, for rights of minorities and that sort of thing. So poor Soros, is in the middle of these two warring camps, and he is right there. And probably his notoriety now is because each side thinks him a representative of the other side. So he is a very polarizing figure.
Alex, do you feel that he's been actually effective with his money or not so much? Because he invested hundreds of millions, I think, in Russia, and then Vladimir Putin got elected, and all of those changes seemed like they were not very effective.
I mean, in Eastern Europe, he was definitely effective because it helped transition former Eastern Bloc countries towards European Union. In Russia, he was less effective because Russia turned out to be different, and whatever he invested in the 90s in the civil society and human rights and democratic institutions essentially was destroyed by Putin. But still, there were hundreds of thousands of people affected by Soros programs. And maybe in 20 years, when Putin is gone, Russia will swing again in the liberal and progressive direction, and those people will be more important than they are now.
Alex, in conclusion, I'd like to ask you, you have such international experience working with Americans, working with Russians, living in America. What do you feel should be the relationship between America and Russia? I think that seemed like Obama's policy wasn't necessarily most effective. Trump's policy, I don't even know if it's a policy. How should we deal with Russia?
Well, West is not monolithic, as we well know, and there are different groups of decision makers. First of all, understand. They should learn and understand the Russian system. Russia is not America, and it works on different rules. And we should understand it. That's number one. If Obama understood Russia and Russian intentions and the inner, driving forces of the Russian system of government better, he would not have made mistakes that he did, like trusting Putin on Syria, for example, or appeasing him in many situations, starting with the Litvinenko case, because the response, not only Obama, but before him, George Bush, the response of the West on these first assassinations was very, very mute, in the hope that these are aberrations. But it turns out, and they got Skripal because they didn't respond to Litvinenko. So Trump is a little bit different, of course, because he has a mysterious personal affinity to Mr. Putin and other dictators around the world, and it defines logic and common sense. But
would you be surprised if it was not about money?
I think it's about money because he's fascinated by the way Putin operates. If we believe those who say that Trump uses his office to enrich himself, Putin should be the role model number one, because those who watch Putin think that he's worth $80 billion accumulated through various schemes while he was in the Kremlin.
Is that how much everything in Russia is worth? Because it seems like he basically owns the country.
No, of course not. He worth those analysts who thinks about it. In some cases, it's been proven, say that he owns specific particular assets hidden in offshore accounts of oil producers and
So you're not
infrastructure.
including all the oligarch money into his. You do really keep it just to things that are associated more or less directly with
Probably
him.
say that Putin is worth. He's probably the richest or one of the richest people on earth. But and again, maybe this is what Litvinenko was close to uncovering, because it's all, insinuations. Nobody has proven anything. But in any case, it's very hard to analyze why Trump is so sympathetic to Putin, whereas his party and his system of foreign policy and national security are no friends of Russia. The only reason they're so sympathetic to Russia is personal attitude of Mr. Trump.
Well, on that note, Alexander Goldfarb, head of Litvinenko Fund, thank you so much for your time. And I will remind listeners and viewers one more time that if they want to contribute $5 or more, they should go to help Litvinenko case. Well, no, actually, to help you defend your reputation against, because you were accused of killing Litvinenko and you're suing them back, and if people want to participate in this kind of a justice, not to mention that putting some brakes on Russian propaganda, frankly, they should go to litvinenkocase.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.